What is up? It's AboveUp, and I wanted to talk about dying games. It's a weird subject that I usually shy away from, especially with all the clickbait surrounding phrases like, X didn't die, it got murdered. This isn't one of those videos. This is not a case study of how an individual game fell from grace or plummeted to death shortly after release, but rather I want to talk about this trend of online-only service games dropping onto a live minefield the moment that they get released. What set this off is the whole situation surrounding the Culling 2. Now, if you don't know what any of this means, we're going to get into it, but the basis is that the Culling was an early battle royale title with a fairly unique premise that didn't have a very long life. And not long after the developers pulled the plug on it, they announced a sequel that naturally did not sit well with people. What you're watching now is very old stream footage of me playing the Culling early in its life cycle. I was one of the few people who played the game back when it was sort of popular, and I didn't bother playing the sequel because I didn't want to give those developers the money a second time. Once was enough. A lot of games have been dying at an incredible fast rate lately, and it's been bugging me. A lot. There have been games that died a really fast death due to one form of incompetence or another shortly into their life cycle. Like that MMO that literally disappeared entirely because the servers needed to be rolled back to, there was nothing to roll back to. Code was missing and the game was gone forever. That's an extreme case, and things like that don't happen too frequently. One of the first moments where I really scratched my head was the Marvel Heroes shutdown. Now, this is a game that ran from 2013 to 2017, so it doesn't feel like it was too extreme or sudden, but the game launched the console versions within the same year that it got shut down, and the date it closed was way sooner than originally stated because funding got completely cut off. This was bad enough by itself, but the people working on those games got kicked to the curb without severance or time off payouts right around the holiday season. People aren't exactly hiring game devs around that time, so Merry Christmas. A lot of these situations are quite like this, and it shows the mentality and thought that not only goes into these projects, but also the way that they are executed. Allowing a project to be completely cut off during the holiday season shortly after a new version of it came out, with no warning to fans or developers alike. Sony and Microsoft at least handed out refunds to players of this game in a smart move to not burn people on the concept of spending money on their platform because a publisher threw it into a dumpster fire as soon as it left their wallet. But still, the damage is kind of done. Which brings us to possibly the most visible sequence of fuck-ups back-to-back by good old Cliffy B, a man stuck in time. I played Lawbreakers when it was in an early beta. In fact, this is my footage of a stream VOD from that time. I actually quite liked it, and so did almost everyone who I've heard say that they played it back then. Now, this case is fairly unique because Cliffy might have caused this on his own because of all the ridiculous statements that he kept making as a marketing nightmare that he is. We all know about the ridiculous stuff like none of that $60 multiplayer only bullshit that he said talking up his multiplayer only shooter that ended up selling for $30. Or how he said that Overwatch was for the anime audience, and how his game was the Mortal Kombat to Overwatch's Street Fighter. The man loves making big statements, but if you keep track of them long enough, it doesn't take long until you start noticing half the time he's contradicting the last time he spoke publicly. Maybe he actually believes his own words while he's in the moment, but it makes him hard to be held accountable. And when you open up shit-talking what's currently the biggest game on the market, which at the time was Overwatch, that's not going to sit well with most people. Be aggressive enough and people are going to want to see you fail. I get where he's coming from. Cliffy's high days were the 90s, back when this sort of marketing was exactly the norm, and the tweets he later posted of his game concept sounded exactly like the kind of games you would see in the 90s. This is not a jab at him, by the way. These all sounds like they could have been something, but they also sound like something that came from an industry at least 15 years ago at best. And the reason that he tweeted these out was because his other game flopped. His 5-month passion project, Radical Heights, flopped almost instantly after taking Devolver Digital's earliest access joke too seriously with its Extreme Early Access project.
Devolver Digital Earliest Access, and we think it will be a revolutionary way to hastily rush unfinished game content out to consumers.
Honestly, the most jarring part about that whole mess was just the question, who is this for? The 80s style gimmick felt like something that would work mostly in the 90s, like a lot of Cliffy's ideas, and I don't see the game having done well even if it was well put together. To make matters worse, from the looks of it, Cliffy never told his own staff or company that they were shutting down, issuing the statement live on Twitter right after one of his own staff members tweeted a promise that a female character model would be soon. I told you that this was earliest access. Before following it up within the hour because the studio was closing. There's other less major situations that have come up the past 2 years, like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite being cut short, being removed from Capcom's official tournament schedule and never making it to EVO, as well as Battleborn ending development on future patches fairly shortly after launch for an online-focused game. Even after going free to play, though at least it had more legs to it than MVCI ever did. Which brings us to the Culling. The Culling was interesting because it was a game fairly early into the Battle Royale genre, with an interesting atmosphere and gameplay style that hasn't really been done to that extent since. Not successfully anyway. Though how successful the Culling was is up for debate. It was very popular for a short time, and in that time it was incredibly fun. You know that feeling when a game is early into development, but you can see how the systems could lend themselves to refinement and improvement over time? The Culling had that, and it's a shame nobody ever really delivered on that, focusing mostly on melee combat and traps and slower projectiles, while slowly moving players towards an actual deathmatch arena at the end of the game. Every patch after the original game attempted to rebalance the melee combat, making it more cumbersome and harder to kill players using it, eventually just destroying most of the fun of the game. In a few months, they effectively chased away their own players by not learning from their mistakes and making things nobody wanted. About a year later, the game was left for dead, abandoned by its own developers and player base not long after launching. It's a shame because at launch it was a game that came at just the right time as the Battle Royale genre was waiting to take off, but hadn't quite done it yet. It did enough right to give itself an identity, and it made people latch on to those early days before the patches completely took it away from them. And then they suddenly announced a sequel a year later, launching soon, and the general response to this was, why? Then they issue another statement saying that soon meant tomorrow, and the general response to this was, wait, what? Within a single day, the game's player count dropped to just 1 player. Perhaps it's the Battle Royale game that's gotten closest to the true essence of the genre in the fastest time, speedrunning the scene to its logical conclusion, beating the record previously set by Radical Heights. But it's not too hard to see what happened here. The developer tried to jump back into the genre after it got incredibly popular, and all the news reports were talking about one of the games in it being completely unstoppable. Not once questioning if maybe at that moment that someone is entirely unstoppable, it's too late to rejoin. Maybe they thought they could pull an epic the way Fortnite did, but Fortnite started as a side mode in a game that already was in development. It wasn't something those developers had invested their entire future in until it took off the way that it did. The developers burned away all their goodwill with the first game, and then not only dared to release a sequel to it after abandoning the first, but then also charge actual money for it when the largest competitor against it is free to play. This would have been bad enough if the game didn't have a high-profile death right before it in the name of Radical Heights, or a sequence of nearly impossible to compete with competitors coming up in the form of both Battlefield and Call of Duty. The quality of these upcoming Battle Royale modes and their popularity is something that we can't really comment on yet, but you best believe 2 of the big IPs entering the fray with this mode as something besides their regular multiplayer is going to make it harder for any upcoming standalone Battle Royale title to compete with it, unless they've already established themselves. Which just begs the question, what were they thinking? Why did they think they could get away with releasing another The Culling game like this? I can't see their motivation being more than just one of greed, stepping back into a genre while it's hot and popular, but I don't think they were really considering anything outside of what they wanted, rather than thinking of what the audience would want. And that honestly feels like the case with almost all these games mentioned in this video. Outside of maybe Marvel Legends, all of them came from a perspective of what the developer wanted people to buy because they either thought it was popular or should be popular, rather than thinking of why people would want these games, or how to convince players of wanting to play it over other options. And that's kind of the thing with these trend-chasing games. They lack a life of their own before they even lacked a lively audience. And in the past, a game might have flopped, but unless something incredibly drastic happened, like a massive recall of it, at least you could still play these titles fairly easily. Now when these games are gone, that's it. They're actually dead, which is probably why it's so interesting for people to discuss the death of these titles and watch videos about it, because they're an ethereal brand of kusoge. You can't play and dissect them apart in your own time once the bubble has burst anymore. I also want to point out that pretty much all the games that I mentioned here went into their death throes during the past 2 years. Most of them the past year, which is absolutely absurd in terms of how fast these deaths have been coming lately. I've left out a lot of situations here, like Mass Effect Andromeda, Paragon, and half of the other games that you would usually see on other channels, because those games didn't really die. I wouldn't say they got murdered either. The rumors of their deaths have been greatly exaggerated, to be honest. Like, you can still go out and play those games. Most of the games that I talked about here are completely gone. They're actually dead. While video games as a media has generally always been looked at as this expendable form of entertainment that needs no archival or restoration or accessibility beyond the hottest new titles, I don't exactly like this trend of high-profile, big-name projects aimed at nobody doing remarkably bad and then becoming unavailable shortly after. And while this is the nature of a lot of online-focused games to not have players in matchmaking after a period of time, it does suck that the experience generally cannot be revisited at all. There's a lot of old PC games that I could boot up right now and host, and we'd at least be able to have a lobby. And there's multiplayer-focused games that I could load up, give someone a second controller, and now we're playing this. I just find it strange we're in the spot where it seems to be all but okay to just cast games aside like this on repeat, with years of people's work just going down the drain with no way to appreciate it anymore. Anyway, this was AboveUp, and yeah, this whole situation is a gigantic clusterfuck and a mess. I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. This video has been brought to you by the people scrolling on the screen right now. If you would like to become one of those, you can pledge on Patreon and you will be added here. But yeah, I'll see ya.